Now I'm ready. Did anyone here listen to the very first episode of the Soul podcast? You probably remember how much Steve and I giggled the whole time. I suddenly feel that way again. So here we are.
Excuse me, is this the John Grisham panel? That's what I signed up for.
All right. Well, before we begin, I did just ask how many people are Soul podcast listeners? Woo! All right. How many people love J.R. Tolkien? Okay, that's good. It is a larger group. But I expect that there'll be the same group by the end. If you don't mind.
My name is Father Andrew, and as you know, I am the host of the Soul podcast, but I almost always have with me a guest co-host, and two of the men sitting here next to me have already been guest co-hosts, and the other two are scheduled to be at some point. So even though this is not the Soul panel, it kind of is the Soul panel on one level or another. But what we want to do is we're going to have essentially three parts today. The first part, each one of us is going to share a brief passage from Tolkien's works that reminds us in some way of heaven. Okay? And then we're going to talk very briefly about that. I'm trying to give each person 7 minutes, and Michael has been like timing his presentation exactly. And I admire him for that. And then what we'll do is then we'll have some conversation together, I hope, and talk about the things that you heard, but then also, the kinds of things that you've read that have given you an image of what the life of the age to come is about, okay? And then the final part, that's the exciting part. That will be the part where people can win prizes. Yay. And I would just say, for those of you who just arrived, if you have not yet put your name in the jar to win a prize, this is your opportunity. And you must be present to win. So as I said, if you're leaving on the 10 o'clock shuttle, you will probably not be present to win. Okay? Sorry, 10 o'clock shuttle people.
Limit one per customer.
Yeah, exactly. Limit one per customer, you must be present to win. Okay, so I thought that I would go first. And so how many people have read The Lord of the Rings? Oh, good. So you all know this book well. Awesome. So the passage I wanted to read is from one of the final chapters. As you know, The Lord of the Rings seems to end, and then it seems to end again, and then it seems to end again. And, great, the more endings, the better. And this is from one of the ending chapters that's called The Field of Cormallen, which is right after the ring has been destroyed. Right after the ring has been destroyed, Frodo and Sam have been picked up by Gwaihir the Wind Lord, the big eagle, and any questions about why they didn't just fly the ring in through eagles will be out of order. Out of order. We don't do that in Middle-earth. We discussed that on the first episode of Amansoya. And so what's happened now is Samwise wakes up. When Sam awoke, he found that he was lying on some soft bed, but over him gently swayed wide beechen boughs, and through their young leaves sunlight glimmered green and gold. All the air was full of a sweet mingled scent. He remembered that smell, the fragrance of Ithilien. Bless me, he mused, how long have I been asleep? For the scent had borne him back to the day when he had lit his little fire under the sunny bank, and for the moment all else between was out of waking memory. He stretched and drew a deep breath. Why, what a dream I've had, he muttered. I'm glad to wake. He sat up, and then he saw that Frodo was lying beside him and slept peacefully, one hand behind his head and the other resting upon the coverlet. It was the right hand, and the third finger was missing. Full memory flooded back, and Sam cried aloud, It wasn't a dream. Then where are we? And a voice spoke softly behind him. In the land of Ithilien and in the keeping of the king, and he awaits you. With that, Gandalf stood before him, robed in white, his beard now gleaming like pure snow in the twinkling of the leafy sunlight. Well, Master Samwise, how do you feel? He said. But Sam laid back and stared with open mouth, and for a moment, between bewilderment and great joy, he could not answer. At last he gasped, "Gandalf, I thought you were dead, but then I thought I was dead myself. Is everything sad going to come untrue? What's happened to the world?" "A great shadow has departed," said Gandalf. And then he laughed, and the sound was like music or like water in a parched land. And as he listened, the thought came to Sam that he had not heard laughter, the pure sound of merriment, for days upon days without count. It fell upon his ears like the echo of all the joys he had ever known. But he himself burst into tears. So I always get a little teared up when I read that section. When I was thinking about this question, heaven in Tolkien, or things that make you think of heaven, I thought of that particular passage, especially where Sam says, "Is everything sad going to come untrue?" But it's interesting. So the first thing he sees is Frodo next to him, and the finger is gone because Gollum has bit it off. And then he sees Gandalf and realizes that Gandalf has been raised from the dead. Because the last time he saw him, he was falling down into the pit of Moria with a Balrog. And so I applied this question to heaven. Is everything sad going to come untrue? And there's a certain level on which, yes, right? There's not, the next thing that happens is Gandalf laughs, and what a laugh, right? It's like music. There is a certain level in which that is true about heaven. And yet, at the same time, when we see the glorified Christ, we still see him with the wounds on his hands and his feet and his side. And even in this moment of total victory, the shadow has departed. Sam looks over and he sees that the finger of his friend is gone. And so there is a sense in which everything sad comes untrue, but there's also another sense in which the sadness, the history of our lives leaves its mark and always will. You will be yourself if you are in the kingdom of heaven. You will still be yourself. You will still bear the scars, but they will be transfigured. They will be changed. They will now be filled with life rather than with death. So that was one of my many pieces of heaven in Tolkien. And so, Michael, since you were directly to my right, why don't you begin with the next piece? I used to be a stagehand. You'd think I'd know how to do this with a mic. That's recording. Just talking to this one.
Everybody hear me okay? You're going to see right now with me my actual podcast process, because I took his edict to be within 7 minutes very seriously. So I scripted it out, and you can time me if you
It's
want.
very impressive.
So my segment is called Heaven, Paradise, and the House of Tom Bombadil. So let me read the passage I selected. For those that really know the chapters, this is from the beginning of The Fog on the Barrow Downs. That night, they heard no noises, but either in his dreams or out of them, he could not tell which. Frodo heard a sweet singing running in his mind, a song that seemed to come like a pale light behind a gray rain curtain, and growing stronger to turn the veil all to glass and silver, until at last it was rolled back, and a far green country opened before him under a swift sunrise. I selected this because the very last time we see Frodo in the book is when he's reflecting on his dream in the House of Bombadil, and he's seeing this vision live. It also reminded me of 2 Corinthians 12, verses 1 through 6, where Paul had his vision of heaven, and Paul said he didn't know if he was in the body or not. Frodo doesn't know if he's awake or not. And this is pointing to the time in his life later when he's broken. He's broken in mind, he's broken in body and soul, and he's beyond healing, and he has to leave and go to the blessed realm, where, as you know, the equivalent of the angels dwell, and no mortal is permitted except through grace, a special grace which he received because of his sacrificial love and accepting the task that was really beyond his natural ability. Now I want to focus on Tom Bombadil for a moment, because Tom Bombadil, as we all know, is a great enigma in Tolkien's universe, and there's been lots of speculation about who he is. In appearance, he seems silly, short man with long beard, yellow boots, long blue coat, capers around singing seemingly silly, nonsensical songs. And the 3 chapters in the Fellowship of the Ring where Frodo and his companions spent in his house, they occur very early on, obviously, in the story. And Tom Bombadil, sadly, never makes it into the movies or any screen adaptation. And if you belong to any Tolkien Facebook groups, especially those groups where it's clear that the people have encountered Tolkien through the movies and have later read the books, Tom Bombadil gets no love. He's very hated, or he's thought of as insignificant. Now, Tolkien invented this character prior to The Lord of the Rings. He wrote some poems involving Tom Bombadil. It was based on a Dutch doll that he gave to his children. And he admitted at one point that he inserted him into the book, into the story, just to give Frodo and his companions some adventures. But as you know, Tolkien revised Lord of the Rings myriad times, and he decided to keep him in. Now, it's been speculated by some that Tom represents God himself, Iluvatar. And that's because Goldberry replies to Frodo's question about who Tom is by simply saying he is, and people have equated that with I am. But Tolkien debunked that and said he would never, in one of his letters, said he would never try to depict the incarnation. Now, certainly those of you who know the debate between Finrod and Andreth know that he had speculation about the incarnation in his universe, but he would never try to depict it. Some have said he's a Vala or a Maya, Tolkien's equivalency of greater or lesser angels, but that's not true either, because in 1937, in letter 19, which he wrote a month before beginning Lord of the Rings, he said Tom is the spirit of the vanishing Oxford and Berkshire countryside. And then in a letter in 1954, 5 years after he finished Lord of the Rings, at least the initial draft, he said he's the deliberate enigma. But we can see that he retains something of Tom's nature spirit likeness, because in the Council of Elrond, the elf Galdor says that the power to defy Sauron is not in Tom unless it's in the earth itself. So there's something nature. So why is Tom and Frodo's vision important in a discussion of Tolkien and heaven? Frodo arguably visits 3 earthly paradises in the story: the House of Tom Bombadil, Rivendell, and Lothlorien. And yet Tolkien chose for Frodo to have his ending dream in Tom's house, not in the other 2 places. Why is that? Well, Tom claims to be the eldest of all things, the very first thing ever created. He says he was in the world before the Dark Lord came from the outside, the Dark Lord being Melkor, not Sauron, which means Tom is indigenous, Tom is intrinsic to the inside. After that phrase where Goldberry, Tom's wife, tells Frodo he is, she points out that he is not the owner of the forest in which he dwells. He has dominion, but not domination. And the quote reads, "The trees and the grasses and all things growing or living in the land belong each to themselves." And you see in the book, Tom has control over nature in a Christ-like way. During a rainstorm, he waves his arms, but the rain doesn't touch him, like Christ calming the storm. And we see that he has his songs of power, they're prayers. They cast out demons, they heal the hobbits. Everything he does is through prayerful singing, echoing the singing of the Ainulindale, the creation myth in Tolkien. So Tom is of nature, but of divine nature. Nature before corruption, and he's free from being corrupted. At one point he says, "Show me the precious ring," and that's a deliberate play on language, because the ring dominates your will, but Tom doesn't want to dominate anything, or will he allow himself to be dominated. So the precious ring is not precious to him and has no control over him, unlike Gollum or Sauron, who want domination. So in the end, Frodo's time in Tom Bombadil's house is a time spent in the closest thing in Middle-earth to Eden before the fall, a near paradise on Earth. An Earth as it was meant before the corruption of Melkor or Sauron. And that's why I believe Tolkien has Frodo have his vision, because Frodo has his vision of paradise in a place of near paradise in the book. Thanks.
Michael referenced the Ainulindale, which I'm going to read now, the creation myth from the Silmarillion. I am reading on an e-reader. Oh no.
Would you like a bigger copy? It's right at the beginning of the book, so.
That is one of the prizes, yes.
This is one of the prizes. Yeah, no, I got you good prizes.
I actually have that book, but it's too heavy to bring here, so yeah.
You're past the sacred text.
Yes. The music of the Ainur. There was Eru, the one who in Arda is called Iluvatar, and he made first the Ainur, the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought. And they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music. And they sang before him, and he was glad. But for a long while they sang only each alone, or but few together, while the rest hearkened. For each comprehended only that part of the mind of Iluvatar from which he came, and in the understanding of their brethren they grew but slowly. Yet ever as they listened they came to deeper understanding, and increased in unison and harmony. And it came to pass that Iluvatar called together all the Ainur, and declared to them a mighty theme, unfolding to them things greater and more wonderful than he had yet revealed. And the glory of its beginning and the splendor of its end amazed the Ainur, so that they bowed before Iluvatar and were silent. Then Iluvatar said to them, of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony together a great music. And since I have kindled you with the flame imperishable, ye shall show forth your powers in adorning this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices if he will, but I will sit and hearken and be glad that through you great beauty has been wakened into song. I'll stop there. Maybe I'll read a little bit more later. But I love this first passage in the Silmarillion. It's one of the most beautiful things I think ever written. But it struck me as I was rereading it again yesterday that Tolkien provides a very interesting vision of an inkling of heaven on earth that ties very well with what I was talking about yesterday. So what I wanted to suggest is that the act of creation, according to Tolkien in his essay on fairy stories, he believed strongly that whenever man subcreates in his language or creates actually in any way a thing of beauty, but specifically if you create something in writing that involves the subcreation of a secondary world, you're actually exercising in some way your capacity as the image of God. God is the creator, and you as his creation, when you subcreate, you are actually exercising your image. This is not something that you're going to find necessarily in the Holy Fathers, but I will tell you this much, that there is something quite transcendent in the act of writing when you are in that moment where it's no longer you writing, but you feel like someone is writing through you, and I think all of you have had this experience. I'll suggest to you that is a close and interesting approximation to what heaven might be like, because at that point you're not thinking, at that point you're in communion, and you are doing something that is yours, but is also not yours. It's coming from outside. It's a union of two wills, of two spirits, like Ivan Ilyin would say, and that kind of writing, I don't know if you've noticed or not, usually tends to be very powerful. It usually tends to affect other people around you in ways that are ineffable. So I thought it was interesting that the theme is suggested by Iluvatar to the Ainur, right? So he suggests to them a theme, and then they kind of think about it by themselves. They hum along and they do something with it. But it doesn't make much sense to them until they begin to sing together as a group, which is what we're all doing here together. So it's not only important to write by yourself in a garret, like a lonely artist, but it's also important to share that work with others and to see how the creativity of other people around you might be able to make that great theme into something more beautiful and more profound. And although I don't think I have time to read, what continues here is that Melkor decides to break communion. He decides to do things by himself, and he makes this cacophonous, horrible bit of music. But even his ugly music in the last image that is then made flesh by Iluvatar is woven into the great music in a beautiful way. So even if you are broken, even if you are fragmented, even if there's a bit of Melkor in you as you are creating, even if you resist communion, there's still a chance that ultimately what you do will then be woven back into that great tapestry. So keep writing, everybody, even when it's hard and even when it seems to be useless and when you don't feel that inkling of heaven. Just keep going, and eventually it'll come back. So that's my thought to you.
Hi. Professor Cyril and I are going to be reading from one of the other prizes, which we'll get to later in the thing. So it's here. There's more good stuff. So I am drawn to, it's kind of like the whole, like, you know, what's your deal thing. Like, be the bee, finding, you know, like the kingdom of heaven is at hand. I'm very much drawn to big things as they are made manifest in small things. I'm very much drawn to grand things as they are made manifest in plain things. And so when Father Andrew approached us with this question about, you know, finding heaven in the text, my instinct went to something not sort of grand, not sort of ethereal, but very, very earthy and down to earth. There's this inbreaking of something large and something plain. And so it's actually the same passage that I brought up in episode 1 of Amansul, and I'm going to read it for you again here. It's the very last passages in the chapter in the Grey Havens at the very end of the trilogy, the Lord of the Rings series. And here it goes. At last, the 3 companions turned away. So this is after they go to the Havens and they say goodbye and all that, right? Very end. At last, the 3 companions turned away, and never again looking back, they rode slowly homewards. And they spoke no word to one another until they came back to the Shire, but each had great comfort in his friends on the long grey road. At last they rode over the downs and took the east road, and then Merry and Pippin rode on to Buckland, and already they were singing again as they went. But Sam turned to Bywater, and so came back up the hill, as day was ending once more. And he went on, and there was yellow light, and fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in, and set him in his chair, and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a deep breath. "Well, I'm back," he said. And I don't know, that's so heavenly. You know, it's this climactic episode and the loss and the tears and the blood that was spilled, right? And at the very end, there's the hallmark of comfort of friends, right? As the tears are finally dried, as the wounds finally begin to heal, comfort of friends. But I think more specifically, even Sam getting back home, right? And heaven as a place at the table. He was expected. There was a meal waiting for him. He was known by name. He had a place, you know. And we all have a seat at the kingdom, even if we don't want that seat. There's a warm seat and a warm plate and an overflowing cup that's waiting for us in the kingdom, and it's there. And so I think about that in that very sort of like just wonderful personal sense, and in the bigger picture sense even, in terms of the progression of what the Shire is. You know, sometimes when we think of heaven, we think of like going back to the garden. But I don't think that's right. It's like the garden itself needs to be redeemed. And sometimes we think of the early Shire as being this, it's certainly heavenly, but it isn't heaven. The Shire needs to go through its scouring. The Shire needs to have tall hobbits that have drunk from Entwash come back. The Shire needs to have hobbits who are wearing shining mail. You know, the Hobbit originally, we know it through the eyes of these 4 bachelors, and then we sort of understand the Shire at the very end through Sam and Rose and little Eleanor and like family, and this maturation that happens, and it's this, which is small and mundane and earthy and warm, which every time I read it just brings up the heaven for me.
Good morning. Most of my 7 minutes is going to be taken up in reading Tolkien. And this is a very dramatic scene, and if this was the first time you had ever heard this scene and you only knew Tolkien from the movies, you would think, what are you reading? And if you want to see Father Deacon Nicholas's head explode, just look at him and say, Peter Jackson's Faramir. We'll get to that later. The drums rolled louder. Fires leaped up. Great engines crawled across the field, and in the midst was a huge ram, great as a forest tree, 100 feet in length, swinging on mighty chains. Long it had been forging in the dark smithies of Mordor, and its hideous head, founded of black steel, was shaped in the likeness of a ravening wolf, on its spells of ruin lay. Grond, they named it, in memory of the hammer of the underworld of old. Great beasts drew it, orcs surrounded it, and behind it walked mountain trolls to wield it. But about the gate resistance was still stout, and there the knights of Dol Amroth and the hardiest of the garrison stood at bay. Shot and dart fell thick, siege towers crashed or blazed suddenly like torches. All before the walls on either side of the gate, the ground was choked with wreck and with bodies of the slain, yet still driven as by a madness, more and more came up. Grond crawled on. Upon its housing no fire would catch, and though now and again some great beast that hauled it would go mad and spread stamping ruin among the orcs innumerable that guarded it, their bodies were cast aside from its path, and others took their place. Grond crawled on. The drums rolled wildly. Over the hills of slain, and a hideous shape appeared. A horseman, tall, hooded, cloaked in black. Slowly trampling the fallen, he rode forth, heeding no longer any dart. He halted and held up a long, pale sword, and as he did so, a great fear fell on all, defender and foe alike, and the hands of men drooped to their sides, and no bows sang. For a moment all was still. The drums rolled and rattled. With a vast rush, Grond was hurled forward by huge hands. It reached the gate. It swung. A deep boom rolled through the city, like thunder running in the clouds. But the doors of iron and posts of steel withstood the stroke. Then the black captain rose in his stirrups and cried aloud in a dreadful voice, speaking in some forgotten tongue words of power and terror to rend both heart and stone. Thrice he cried, thrice the great ram boomed, and suddenly upon the last stroke the gate of Gondor broke. As if stricken by some mighty blasting spell, it burst asunder. There was a flash of searing lightning, and the doors tumbled in riven fragments to the ground. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul, a great black shape. Against the fires beyond he loomed up, grown to a vast menace of despair. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul, under the archway that no enemy had ever yet passed, and all fled before his face. All save one. There waiting, silent and still in the space before the gate sat Gandalf upon Shadowfax. Shadowfax, who alone among the free horses of the earth endured the terror, unmoving, steadfast as a graven image in Rath-Dinnan. You cannot enter here, said Gandalf, and the huge shadow halted. Go back to the abyss prepared for you. Go back. Fall into the nothingness that awaits you and your master. Go! The black rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, yet upon it no head visible was set. The red fire shone between it, and the mantled shoulders vast and dark. From a mouth unseen there came a deadly laughter. Old fool, he said. Old fool, this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it? Die now and curse in vain. And with that he lifted high his sword, and flames ran down the blade. Gandalf did not move. And in that very moment, away behind in some courtyard in the city, a cock crowed. Shrill and clear he crowed, recking nothing of wizardry or war, welcoming only the morning that in the sky, far above the shadows of death, was coming with the dawn. And as if in answer, there came from far away another note. Horns, horns, horns. In dark Mindolwin's sides they dimly echoed, great horns of the north wildly blowing. Rohan had come at last. I do have something to say. There's a couple things about this, but the two things that strike me most about this when we think about heaven, because this seems like, wow, heaven? The city's in fire, right? But there's two things. First is the creatures that are here represented. The first, of course, is the steed of the Nazgul, a slave. The other is Shadowfax, who alone among the free creatures. Heaven, says St. Maximus, is that place where all of our virtues shall exist in reality. Those gifts God has given us that we might be like him will finally be realized, even though now in this life we can exercise them. And here's Shadowfax, seemingly untouched by fear, by dread, but instead courage, which to me is probably the most important of the virtues in so many ways. And then the rooster. The city's on fire. The chickens are probably all gone. But you know what? I've got one thing I'm supposed to do, and I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter. And then in response, the horns of Rohan. Our life here on earth is supposed to be one that we live in harmony with everything around us. And we don't get to realize it now. Only in heaven do we get to realize this harmony. Now we do get to taste it in our singing, when we sing well, and even when we don't. We still get to have it, right? And so it's this harmony, the horns, the rooster, but then also the courage to do it. And so this was the passage that I chose.
I teared up several times there. I always say to people, I could read these books for the rest of my life, and that's the plan. So we have about 20 minutes for some conversation before we get to the final segments. So if you'd like to say something or to ask something, whatever, you can step on up to the mic that is right over here. But make sure you talk good and loud, because I think this mic is just for recording only. It's not going to amplify you. So any comments? Here comes someone.
I cannot even tell you how grateful I was that somebody brought up Tom Bombadil, because I love Tom Bombadil. And when we watched the movies and he wasn't in it, I was so mad that I didn't want to see the next one. And my husband had to pretty much beg me to go. Like, this is stupid. You're totally ruining this book. And I like it so much that I made my youngest son wear yellow boots and recite Father Tom. And so, like, now that he's turning 15, he like has this understanding that his mother is crazy. But that's okay. Because, it's Tom Bombadil. You gotta love Tom, right? So
God bless you.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I was just comment on Tom Bombadil. I was listening to what Steve said, and I'm writing notes furiously because my mind just goes like this, and if I don't write it down, it goes out. But you talk about what you're drawn to in Christianity, and I've always been drawn to the mystery, as Frederica quoted yesterday, Metropolitan Callistos, or Thursday, being drawn into the mystery. And that's what Tom is. Tom is a great mystery. But it's interesting, too, when you think about Tom, he didn't seek domination. And Deacon Nicholas read this passage, and later on, in that same chapter, Melkor goes looking for the flame imperishable because he wants to possess it. He wants to dominate it. He doesn't realize it's within Iluvatar himself. And in an interview in 1966 with Clyde Kilby, Tolkien explicitly stated that the flame imperishable is the Holy Spirit. So here you have Tom Bombadil, seemingly a silly character. In Lord of the Rings, you have the Hobbit book written in a childish way, in a good way, and then you have the Silmarillion written in a grand, majestic way, yet this theme of domination versus dominion is in each book. And that's the tragedy of leaving Tom Bombadil out of any screen adaptation. They've missed a golden opportunity to communicate a deep theme of Tolkien, but the zeitgeist today will not permit him to be in any movie.
Any other comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what you're talking about, the movies and the lack of Tom Bombadil. Yes, I'm going to talk about Faramir. because it's the same thing, right? So Peter Jackson explicitly said, I don't know the exact quote, there's no point in quoting it exactly, but basically that if you show the ring as anything other than absolutely powerful, if you show a single character with the ability to withstand it, then the whole movie collapses, according to Peter Jackson. So you cannot have anybody with any power within themselves, just even to say no. So yeah, Tom Bombadil, you check out the window. And Faramir is reduced to a simpering idiot who does really terrible things to the hobbits. Sacrificing, by the way, one of the only passages in the entire Legendarium, at least in the later part of it, where men worship or do something similar to worship. If you remember, they turn to the west and have this moment of silence before they, a kind of blessing before they eat. It's the only explicit reference to any sort of religion, so to speak, in The Lord of the Rings. And the Faramir of the movies would not do that because he is, I can't understand what his motivation is. He doesn't seem to have anything other than to be a poster child for the ultimate power of evil. So yeah, I don't like it.
Any other questions, comments? Please step up to the mic. All right.
Watch out, world.
I brought this up with you, Deacon Nicholas, just last night or at some point. It seems to me, and we're in a room now of people who write and imagine, it seems to me that one of the things that I feel as an Orthodox Christian that we miss out on, or that I don't know how to get access to, is an imaginative vision of the age to come. I've read St. Ephraim's hymns on Paradise. They're very strange. I've read, bits and pieces, but it seems to me that our whole thrust of our life as Christians is in order that we may be saved. And we have a lot of language to talk about that kind of theologically, but we have almost no language to imagine what that means, other than, I think, Tolkien or the last scene of the last battle, or some other scenes in the Chronicles of Narnia. For me, I'm saying, for me as a Christian, that's where I go when I think, what's the next life? What does it mean? What is it going to be like? And I've read visions of saints and things like that. They're often very abstract. What I want to ask, I guess, is there a way for us as Orthodox Christians to really be inspired by what Tolkien and Lewis had to offer about an imaginative vision of the age to come, and to offer that to each other in some way?
I think I'll start for taking that one myself. I think the answer to your question, Benedict, is yes. But one of the things that occurred to me as you were speaking is that our liturgical texts, for instance, don't really imagine the life of the age to come that much. They don't. As a priest, worshiping, doing services almost every day for a while and so forth. I've seen a lot of our liturgical tradition, a lot of those texts, and there isn't often that sensibility there. I remember when I was an evangelical Protestant, we had lots of hymns about streets made of gold and I've got a mansion just over the hilltop. That kind of thing. And that was what was kind of in my head, when I was an evangelical 20-something years ago. But there's definitely a restraint in terms of depicting the age to come in our liturgical tradition, and even in the Scripture. I mean, there's not much there. I mean, you got the stuff that's in the Book of Revelation, which we as Orthodox Christians don't seem to know that book very well, but it is part of our Bible, and we actually have a canonical interpretation of it written by St. Andrew of Caesarea, which is basically almost sort of canonized alongside that text in a sense. But I'll say this, I think that restraint is there because when you start, even if you have a vision of a scene or something like that, when you start putting that stuff forward and really emphasizing that, then the danger is to try to absolutize that, and that's the expectation. And indeed, that's what you become oriented toward, right? Like that's what you're sort of trying to achieve, especially if it's put into a sacralized context. Like if you hear it sung in church, then you have every right to expect that's what it is, right? So I think that if I had to just sort of speculate where we kind of go from there, because I think it's valuable, I think there is a need for what you're talking about. I need it. I mean, this is why I chose this theme for our panel, right? Yeah. I think we have space in which we can wander and imagine and sing to each other, and not say, well, what I'm saying is dogma. What I'm saying, this is what heaven looks like. But there is something about, well, let me draw you my picture, and maybe you can receive something from that picture as well. But you could take it or leave it, because I'm not speaking as a dogmatic theologian here. I'm simply describing my response to how I see the life of the age to come. What will resurrection be like? What will, I always tell my kids, I want to, if I happen to be alive on the day that the Lord comes back, I want to be standing in a cemetery, because that'll be awesome. And that's one piece of imagination that I have, and I think like that would be so weird, to be in a cemetery when the resurrection happens, but so cool, and it's funny how our age is actually interested in that scene, except we think of it as zombies. Yeah. But they're not zombies. We're not going to be zombies. There'll be light in our eyes, So I don't know. Does anyone else have any comments on that question, Cyril?
Benedict, I can't think it's going to be too much wildly different than what we were doing last night singing. And for those of you who weren't there, Benedict and his lovely wife basically led a bunch of us in singing. And some of it you wouldn't think, are these people Orthodox? What's going on here? And it was so good, I actually had to go out and find someone and get something to drink after we had that Irish drinking song. And where is Jamie? Anyway. But in one sense, I think that heaven is going to be, heaven ultimately is going to be what we were created for. And of course, what we've had is the whole drama of redemption that's now completely taken over our lives. But if we look back at the garden, we were created to tend the garden. And that's one of the images that we have. And I grew up with gardens, vegetable gardens, because I had a big family. But tending the garden, a garden with no weeds. And I sat this morning with 2 beekeepers. And because, this is one of the great blessings that's given us. I mean, it's the blessing promised to the children of Israel, land flowing with milk and honey. And so I think in a lot of ways what we're going to have, in one sense, is the fulfillment of all our wildest expectations for this life, but then actually put into the key that's appropriate for our life in the age to come.
One quick thought.
Yeah.
I hope this makes sense. One quick thought. I feel like the question makes me realize, like, sometimes I think we're too literal and we're too curious for our own good, and I think the two go hand in hand. Literalism in the sense that we have that sort of like that scientific materialist, kind of like that very thin way of approaching things. Yeah. And I think curiosity is related to that, because curiosity is all about answering questions. It's all about sort of understanding. But like even the Book of Revelation, right? The Book of Revelation is poetry on some level. The last battle, or the sort of the scenes from the Lord of the Rings, it's poetry on some level, and it's anti-literal. It's anti-curious in a sense too, because it's not really about seeking an answer. It's sort of like sitting in wonder, which Professor Cyril was talking about yesterday as well. And that could be a hard thing for us today because we're all sort of like modern, secular, whatever people, right? And I realize it myself too, because I tend to be very sort of cerebral, and I tend to be very literal, and I tend to be very curious. But I don't know if we can. I don't know if that makes any sense. If we can be a little bit less literal, a little less curious, and a little bit more willing to just sort of sit in beautiful wonder, the yellow light of the fire, right?
Can I say something? So part of what Benedict's getting at is how can we maybe as writers depict a vision of the end times or of salvation, of redemption, right? That's what you're talking about. One word, eucatastrophe, and that was one thing that I wish Dr. Jenkins had added to the end of his passage, is that what happened with the horns was a eucatastrophe. The experience of eucatastrophe, according to Tolkien, is, oh wow, there's a line. Okay, I'll be quick.
Suddenly this line formed. Like what Steve said was clearly super inspiring.
Wow. Maybe I should just be quiet. So that sudden turning at the absolute worst possible moment, and suddenly we are saved. Not Deus Ex Machina, because that's too easy, but something that was already in the story and already hinted at, but it couldn't possibly happen, and yet it does. Which happened at the end of The Lord of the Rings, which happened in that scene, which Tolkien's argument is that that's what happened with the Incarnation. And I think if we were, as writers, able to come up with some sort of imaginative scenario or a story where that happens, I think we're hinting at the reality of what that will look like. And that's symbol, right? And we work best in symbol, which is what Steve is talking about, right? Don't be literal, be symbolic. So glory in those symbols, and maybe you'll be allowing some of the light of that age to come to sort of filter through. Yeah.
Awesome. Oops. All right, we have 5 minutes. So what I'm going to let you guys do, 5 minutes for more comments and questions. So what I'm going to let you guys do is each of you have your say.
Okay, I'll make this really quick. I think the idea of looking at heaven is great, but you've got to remember those books, they talk about the journey. The journey that Frodo went on. He had to give up his materialistic, comfortable life in the Shire before he reached heaven. And I think that's what Tolkien is trying to get us to do, is to put down our comfortable lives and to basically become martyrs in this journey through time in order to reach heaven.
Great point.
Forgive me for sharing a dream. So I had this dream that I was making the best cheesecake in the world. Okay? And I really do make the best cheesecake in the world. You would love it. And I'm making this cheesecake, and my mother and my daughter are there. They've both passed away. And I'm getting ready to serve it to them. And I'm like, here, would you like a piece of my cheesecake? And they both look at each other like, how do we say this? And they're like, we're so sorry, sweetie, but the cheesecake in heaven is so much better. Yours would just taste like ashes.
Oh, no.
So the thing about heaven is this: it's beyond everything. It has the best cheesecake, better than mine. Everything is so different. It's like the real cheesecake is in heaven.
Yeah. It's better than the best cheesecake.
Do I hear a slight echo of The Great Divorce there, where everything is more real in heaven? Yeah. That's by C.S. Lewis. You should read it, The Great Divorce.
I think Benedict touched on this, just the Orthodox voice. And I don't know, early in my journey from evangelical Baptist-Costalism, I feel like there was a discouragement of imaginative. And so we're borrowing from an Anglican and a Catholic, and I got a taste of heaven from Peter Spiegel's Last Unicorn in a Fine and Private Place, and he's far from far from Christ. So I'm like, I know you can even borrow, you can get tastes of this outside the faith, but I really am. How do we do this without being these literal, metaphorical, where it's so obvious? That's what I love about Tolkien, is it's not in your face. So anyway, I leave that with you guys.
I hope this doesn't sound too esoteric. I hope it's also practical, but one of the speakers yesterday mentioned St. Therese of Lisieux, who is a Catholic saint. I'm a recent convert from Catholicism to Orthodoxy. And the original question about heaven and how we understand heaven, he mentioned, reading the visions of the saints. Yeah, you can do that. But, my thought was the key to understanding heaven, as far as we can in this life, which isn't very much, is actually in our own prayer life. And I was reminded of another Catholic saint. My personal favorite is St. John of the Cross, who was also a great mystic. He gave a really interesting teaching that I think might apply to us as writers, is that as God purifies us in the prayer life, there are 3 key things that need purifying, along with others. But these keys are the memory, the intellect, and the will. And also the imagination as part of that. So I think that as we're writers and trying to write, to think, to imagine, to speculate, there's a level at which we also need to let go of everything we can imagine or think, let go of even our writing. When we go to prayer, and give it all to God and ask him to purify it and then to enlighten us, because he illuminates our hearts and our minds. So I think that the key to that question really is in each of our own prayer lives and our interior lives, to the extent that we can surrender our writing to God. Yeah. And allow him to rewrite and reformulate. Someone at the beginning was talking about the inspiration that comes during writing. Yep. So I want to share that teaching of St. John of the Cross. Be willing to allow God to purify even your imagination, as you're in that writing process. And he will inspire you with very beautiful and much deeper things to write and to express.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, you're it.
All right.
You're the last, so this better be good.
I am the very last. So we've had a lot of talking about Tolkien and about Lewis, but I haven't heard mention of a figure who has a lot to say about this question of depicting, metaphorically at least, heaven and the process of salvation, who is very influential to Lewis in particular. I think you might know who I'm talking about, George MacDonald. Yeah. So can anyone here give a little comment on George MacDonald? It doesn't have to be long.
Read him.
He's one of my favorite. Yeah. He's one of my favorite imaginative authors. He wrote one of the first werewolf stories. He wrote a very early vampire story, which is very funny and satirical. And so he's writing in the middle of the 19th century, I believe, and towards the end. So if anyone can give a comment on how, or just comment on George MacDonald himself.
George MacDonald is definitely worth reading. He wrote a lot of early fairy tales, like The Princess and the Goblin and stuff like that. But I will at least add this cautionary bit. He is a universalist, and that comes out every so often in some of the stuff that he says. So, you can't read him as being an Orthodox theologian, because he wasn't Orthodox. I think he was he Church of Scotland, I think? Yeah. But a lot of amazing stuff, and there's a beautiful anthology of quotes from his stuff that was actually put together by C.S. Lewis, just little bits. Anyone else want to comment on George MacDonald briefly? It's kind of a big can of worms.
MacDonald had an immense influence, of course, on Lewis. And Lewis talks about how before he read MacDonald, he had a completely unbaptized imagination. And it's only when he read Phantastes that this suddenly changed how he thought about the imaginative world. And so in all of that, he's excellent to read. If you want to think about Lewis and Tolkien as kind of the canon, we can think about George MacDonald as Homer, Virgil, right? Those virtuous pagans that existed before the canon. So you think about it like that.
Just real quick, in the spirit of George MacDonald's influence on Tolkien and Lewis, more so Lewis, if you're interested to know what Tolkien himself read in the books that he owned, there's a book coming out in August called Tolkien's Library, an annotated checklist. It's from the publisher, same publisher that published my book, shameless plug, Echoes of Truth, Christianity, and Lord of the Rings. But I'm looking forward to this book because I really don't know everything that Tolkien read. So I'd be really interested to see what were the books that really influenced him.
Well, you know what time it is. It's always my favorite part of the show. You have to wait until the lyrics begin, you know. Anyway. Everyone remember that on YouTube? All right. Well, so this is the part of our panel today in which we are going to play a small game. And the subtitle for this game is Stump Michael Haldas. But we are indeed going to play a Tolkien trivia game, and here's the way that it's going to work. Each one of our panelists, except for me, is going to be playing on behalf of an audience member whose name that he will draw. So they're not eligible to win. But they will be playing on behalf of an audience member whose name they will draw. And if your name gets drawn, you will win something. Okay? So if your name gets drawn, you will win something. There are 4 prizes, 4 panelists, right? So it's just a matter of who's in first, depending on what you get, first, second, third, or fourth prize. Okay, is that clear to everybody? Okay, so first what we're going to do is we're going to have everybody draw their names. Michael Haldas will be playing on behalf of?
Hannah. I can't read the last name. Vasquez?
Oh, that's me?
Okay.
Yay! All right.
I'll do my best.
All right, Deacon Nicholas.
Patricia Bartlett.
Wow, it's the front row. Oh, this was not planned at all. Okay, all right.
Nikki Johnson. I apologize in advance.
Is Nikki Johnson present?
Judge, what do we do?
You have to be present to win. Okay, we're going to have to draw another one.
Okay.
All right, sorry, Nikki.
I did apologize in advance. Just 1 or 2. Wendy Regis.
Yay! All right.
I apologize in advance.
All right.
John Sotirio.
Sotirio.
Up.
All right. All right. All right. We'll keep your names.
I apologize in advance.
All right. So all 4 of those people will win something. So congratulations already. Yay!
So everybody look down at
All right.
No.
Now,
You might want 4 plays.
you might know the answers to these questions. Do not say them out loud. Of course, you could be wrong. So here's what we're going to do. As I ask each question, they're all going to be multiple choice. Yay! Okay, so as I ask each question, you have in front of you a notepad, and I want you to write your answer out with the Sharpie that I provided for you. Everybody got your Sharpie? There's your Sharpie right there, Michael.
I have one?
All right. So you just write your answer real big, and then when you're ready, you can simply hold your answer up. Okay? So I recommend maybe you turn your notepads horizontal. Exactly. Half the table already got that, but this half is all right. And by the way, spelling counts.
Oh. That's not fair.
And it's Tolkien, by the way. So.
That's not fair.
How to spell A, how to spell B,
No.
how to spell C, how to spell...
You don't have to use, circumflexes and whatever. I will, All right. Everybody ready?
No.
Okay. There are 5 questions. So here's our first. Oh, I need someone to volunteer to be a scorekeeper. Who would like to volunteer? Okay, you'll be scorekeeper. I will say the correct answer, and then you look and see who's got the right one, and then they get 1 point if they got it right. Okay. All right.
Is there partial credit?
There is no partial credit. Okay, question 1. Hobbits are known for their passion for family history and genealogy. How are the famous Merry and Pippin related? Are they first cousins? Are they third cousins? Or are they both of the above? Write your answer. First cousins, third cousins, or both? Write your answer out. All right. Everybody ready? Okay, everyone hold up your answers, please. The correct answer is both. They are, yes. Yes, Mary and Pippin, hold up your answers so that our scorekeeper can make sure she gets who got it right and who did not get it right. I already stumped Michael. Yes, Mary and Pippin are first cousins, sharing a common grandfather in Aldegrim Tuk. They are also third cousins in that Mary's great-grandmother on his father's side, Mirabella Brandybuck, is Pippin's great-great-aunt. They are also related to Bilbo, by the way, being both his first cousins twice removed and also his second cousins twice removed. And they are related in several more ways to Frodo as well. It's one big happy family.
Yet they were all smart.
All right. Pretty good so far. All right, question number 2. And this is a good one, I think. Who is the only person in the history of the One Ring who ever gave it up willingly to another person? And here are your options. Don't write anything down yet. Bilbo Baggins, Frodo Baggins, Tom Bombadil, Gandalf the Grey, Samwise Gamgee, or all of the above? Bilbo, Frodo, Tom Bombadil, Gandalf, Samwise, all of the above. Write down your answers.
This is arguable.
All right. Everyone's ready? Okay, hold up your answers. The correct answer is, in fact, all of the above. No, I didn't say the first, I said the only. In the Lord of the Rings chapter, Shadow of the Past, this is why it's a trick question. I'm sure why Michael's going to argue with me. In the Lord of the Rings chapter, Shadow of the Past, Gandalf says, "A ring of power looks after itself, Frodo. It may slip off treacherously, but its keeper never abandons it. At most, he plays with the idea of handing on to someone else's care, and that only at an early stage when it first begins to grip. But as far as I know, Bilbo alone in history has ever gone beyond playing and really done it." Yet, within that same chapter, Frodo hands it over to Gandalf. Gandalf hands it back to Frodo. And in subsequent chapters, Tom Bombadil holds it briefly, having been handed it again by Frodo. And Samwise Gamgee famously carries it for a while and gives it back to Frodo. So the way I asked it was deliberately to stump people, but also to circumvent what Gandalf said. So you could say that Gandalf's words, of course, are technically correct if you define keeper pretty narrowly. So yes, this is a
Are you also comfortable circumventing the Holy Fathers?
No. But I don't know what they have to say about that question. So. All right. What's the score so far?
I got nothing.
2, 2, 1.
Wow. All right. Okay. Okay, here's another question about family relations. Oh, no. How is Arwen related to Aragorn? Oh. Is she his 43rd great aunt? Is she his first cousin, both 62 times removed and 67 times removed? Or is she his 86th great grandmother? I'll accept aunt, cousin, or great or grandmother.
Say that again.
So is she his 43rd great aunt? Is she his first cousin, both 62 times removed and 67 times removed? Or is she his 86th great grandmother? They are indeed related. All right.
Yeah. I forget the numbers you said.
Yeah, I don't have to give the numbers, but.
Okay. Let me just...
Everybody ready? Everybody? Okay. Yes. All right, hold up your answers. She is his first cousin, both 62 times removed and 67 times removed. Does everybody get it?
kind of an A.
Oh, no, Steve said aunt. Oh.
Yeah.
First cousin, yeah, there you go.
Sorry, I was thinking of Game of Thrones. I apologize.
Yes, so...
It's heresy, man.
Oh. We don't mention that show.
No.
Arwen's father Elrond had a brother named Elros, who is the origin of the line of kings of Numenor from whom Aragorn is descended. So that makes them first cousins. Aragorn can count either 62 or 67 generations back to Elros, depending on whether you follow the line from his descent from Isildur or Isildur's brother Anarion. Here's a fun little fact. When Aragorn and Arwen met, he was 20, but she was somewhere around 2,700. Their courtship lasted for about 6 decades after that. It was a long wait. That's some engagement. But they were married for 120 years, so that's pretty good. All right. Question number 4, and this is the one where spelling really actually super counts.
No. Hey.
Okay. This one tests whether you've read the appendices. It's true. In his youth, Aragorn journeyed in the lands of both Gondor and Rohan and even fought in their wars. But during that time, he used an assumed name. What was that name? Was it Thorondir, Thorongil, Thorondor, Thoronath, or Bingo Baggins?
One more time.
Throndir, Thorongil, Thorondor, Thoronath, or Bingo Baggins? Are you sure? Everybody ready?
No.
Okay. All right, hold up your answers. The correct answer is Throngil. And Michael asked, the name means eagle of the star.
How do you spell it? Because I've got 2 different spellings here.
Thorongil, that's a G.
Yeah, it's a G. Sorry, I don't know it right well.
I'll accept that because it's a G. Deer does not count. Thoronath is a place.
He has a UIL, Mr. Judge.
Yeah, I'll accept that because he's got the G. Because it's pronounced roughly the same. All right, so Throngil, yeah, it means eagle of the star. So according to the appendices at the end of Lord of the Rings, it was under this name that Aragorn actually served both King Thengel of Rohan, which was Theoden's father, and Ecthelion, the steward of Gondor, who was Denethor's father. In his service in Gondor, he warned the steward not to trust Saruman the White, but rather Gandalf the Grey. It was in this period that Denethor came to regard Thorongil as something of a rival and Gandalf as an enemy. See, there's a backstory, right? And these relationships clearly play out in Return of the King, where Thorongil comes to Gondor under his true name of Aragorn. And Bingo Baggins, by the way, is in fact Bilbo's uncle. I did not make up the name Bingo Baggins.
It makes you wonder how come we have the name Tom.
Right? Occasionally you get names like Tom. Yeah. And there's a Ted.
And a Harry.
And a Harry, yeah, right.
Sam,
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Bill.
Our final question. In The Lord of the Rings, the Lady Galadriel of Lothlorien famously gives to the dwarf Gimli 3 strands of her hair as a gift. Beautiful moment, right? This scene mirrors one in Unfinished Tales, in which a famous elf asks Galadriel 3 times for a strand of her hair, and she refuses. Who is that famous elf? Is it Finrod, Feanor, Eärendil the Mariner, Gildor, or Thranduil? Finrod, Feanor, Eärendil, Gildor, or Thranduil?
Extra credit, I heard.
Look at that umlaut. All right. The correct answer is Feanor. Did everybody get it? Nice. There is a scene, this is why you should read Unfinished Tales, people. There is a scene in Unfinished Tales which never made it into the Silmarillion, which includes this text about Galadriel's hair. I'm going to read it to you. It was golden like the hair of her father and of her foremother Indis, but richer and more radiant. for its gold was touched by some memory of the star-like silver of her mother. And the Eldar said that the light of the two trees, Laurelin and Telperion, had been snared in her tresses. Many thought that this saying first gave to Feanor the thought of imprisoning and blending the light of the trees that later took shape in his hands as the Silmarils. For Feanor beheld the hair of Galadriel with wonder and delight. He begged 3 times for a tress, but Galadriel would not give him even 1 hair. These 2 kinsfolk, the greatest of the Eldar of Valinor, were unfriends forever. And so it was that many thousands of years before Facebook, Galadriel unfriended Feanor. Isn't that awesome? The word unfriends is actually in there. I didn't make that up. That's really good. All right. Okay. Well, very good, guys. So how do we play out here? What are our scores? How many does Michael have? Oh, you're starting with Dr. Jenkins and Cyril.
Oh, sorry,
Whatever. Okay.
You have 5.
5. Wow. Perfect score. And Steve?
3.
Steve has 3.
Respectable.
Yes. Oh, so it's 5, 3, 3, and 3? Oh, wow. There's a perfect 3-way tie. Man, I feel like I didn't prepare a tiebreaker. I should just randomly open to something and ask you a question. No, no. I think what we're yeah, okay, well, let's do that.
Why not?
The question is, should I open to the back of the book, or just somewhere in the middle?
More appendices?
More appendices. There we go. All right, the lightning round. Okay.
Is it just for those 3?
Just for those 3, you win.
You win.
You are for you get your. So yes, your person wins first prize. All right. Okay.
Why should I ask them the question?
All right. Yeah. Okay. Actually, that would be too easy. I'm not gonna ask that one. Yeah. Right.
Bilbo. When. It's when. The first word in the book. Look it up.
I can see you win.
Okay, here we go. Here's one that's just off the top of my head. The dwarven name for Moria. Is it pronounced? I'm not asking you what the name is. Is it pronounced Khazad-dûm or Khazad-dûm?
Khazad.
Is it Khazad-dûm or Khazad-dûm?
It's Khazad. Are we writing or are we?
Whatever. Yeah, sure. So basically, either a K or a rough H, essentially. And I just looked this one up the other day, so I know the answer.
I'm not making phonetically.
Oh, so you've got is that using you're saying the rough H essentially?
Rough H, yeah.
What are you guys doing?
I'm doing just K.
Okay.
Steve is correct.
Oh!
Yes! All right, so Steve is second place.
Hello. After all these years, I'm saying.
It's a trick question because it's spelled KH, but it's pronounced not a, which unfortunately in the movies, when Christopher Lee says it, he pronounces it Khazad-dûm. So he throws everybody off. But I know you don't care about what happens in the movies. So.
Sorry,
all right, this is really fun. It's exciting. I have no idea what's going to happen next.
Neither do we.
All right.
So we need one more tiebreaker.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, one more tiebreaker between these two now, between Deacon Nicholas and Michael Haldas. Okay. So you know that the first king of Númenor was Elros, right? Yeah. Who is the second king of Númenor? Is it Vardamir, Tar Amandil, or Tar Elendil? Vardamir, Tar Amandil, or Tar Elendil? Let me see yours, Deacon. What's yours, Deacon? Oh, you're both correct. All right. Man, this is getting down to the end here. All right. You're just randomly picking weird details out of the book. All right. Okay. Wow, this is really cool. All right. So, what is the name of the meaning? What is the meaning of the name Éowyn? I'm not going to give you any hints on this one. What is the name of the meaning? The meaning of the name Éowyn? You know? You don't know? It means taking joy in horses. Yeah, really. It is awesome. It's so awesome. It's so awesome.
What's that?
Éowyn, really? Yeah. There's a lot of people named after characters in The Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Arwen is the single most popular Lord of the Rings name. Arwen. Yeah. Lots of Arwens out there. Okay. All right. Boy, this is getting hard.
You're doing a great job on the fly, though.
I'm trying. I am in the appendices, though, so what can I tell you? All right. Okay, so there were two different names that the Eldar, that is to say the elves, had in their languages for mankind, right? The most commonly known one was the Edain. What was the other one?
I'm guessing. I know that we refer to this.
No.
Look it up. Look it up.
Atani, the Atani. Yeah, that's the other
Atani,
name
the afterboard.
For the elves.
Yeah.
The elves for mankind. Yeah, right. I almost feel like making them flip a coin or something here.
I'm gonna pick it up. I can't say it. They're gonna pick it up on the mic.
Yeah. Okay. All right, here we go. The tongue of the hobbits, the old tongue of the hobbits, is descended from the tongues of men or of elves? Good language question. What do you got? Men, elves? It is descended from the language of men! Yay! All right. Man. Like I feel like I was being quizzed now because I had to come up with these questions off the top of my head. I have to prepare better next time. I didn't think there would be this three-way tie. I mean, who could have imagined that? All right. Okay. Well, pass me down that book that's there. Okay. So there are 4 prizes. So first, we're going to do 4th prize. So who are you playing on behalf of, Deacon Nicholas?
Patricia Bartlett.
Patricia Bartlett. Come and receive your prize from your contestant. It is a beautiful deluxe edition of The Lord of the Rings with a sort of leather-ish cover that makes it really easy to read, and you won't break the binding. And my copy is also the same.
And it's podcast used.
This is great because I have an old copy from
Back in the day.
decades ago, paperback, which is all falling apart.
Oh yeah, I've got one of those too.
Yes.
Nice.
I did the right thing.
It was ordained.
All right.
Your Discord actually.
Okay.
Yes.
So 3rd prize is The Art of the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. These are actually, yeah, this is nice, huh? These are actually drawings and paintings and stuff that were made by Tolkien himself. So who are you playing on behalf of?
For Hannah. That's good.
Hannah. All right. Congratulations, Hannah. All right. And for 2nd prize, Steve, this is a beautiful hardcover edition of the Silmarillion illustrated by Ted Naismith, who has been said to be the Thomas Kincaid of Tolkien illustrators. But he does beautiful, beautiful stuff. So who were you playing on behalf of?
Wendy Regas.
Yeah, congratulations. You're welcome. And then 1st prize. This is a complete boxed edition of the Great Tales of Middle-earth. The 3, so you've got The Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien, and The Fall of Gondolin, which all came out within the past several years. These are all sort of novel-level expansions from Tolkien's notes that were put together by his son, Christopher Tolkien. So these parallel stories that are in the Silmarillion, but there are much bigger treatments of all 3 of them. So this is 1st prize. So who are you playing on behalf of, Cyril?
For John.
All right, John, congratulations.
Great job.
Thank you, John. So congratulations to all of you. And my hope is that in addition to talking about some books that you have read, almost everybody said that they've read The Lord of the Rings. How many have read the Silmarillion? Fewer of you. the rest of you, I think, especially after hearing the passage that Deacon Nicholas read, don't you want to go out and get your own copy? Yes. But you can't steal Wendy's. You can't have Wendy's. But if she's really nice, maybe she'll show you the amazing pictures in it, because it's really one of the most beautiful Tolkien books that there is. But yeah, so read the Silmarillion. You know, it reads more like mythic tales, you know, than like a novel. And I hope that you know, you could spend your whole life reading all of Tolkien's works, and I hope that you'll delve more deeply into it. And of course, you know, reread Lord of the Rings every year, as we all supposed to. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And I hope that you'll tune into the Amansul podcast, where we do some of this kind of thing regularly on the podcast, and you hear some of these same voices. And it's just been a joy to share this time with you. And I think we have perhaps some final closing words from our CEO, John Maddox.